Hello, and welcome to our podcast. Each month on this podcast, we look back at games played by members of our community. My name is Lowell, and I use he, him pronouns. And today, I'm joined by my co-host, Sherri.
Hello.
Sherri, how are you doing today?
I am doing just fine. Thank you.
All right. We're in the same house, so I have to check because you're just a couple rooms over. But we're also very lucky to be joined today by José Feito, who is a Gauntleter who's been playing with the Gauntlet for a while, who has been playing and running. And I had the pleasure of having José in my game facilitator camp, which was really awesome. José, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, best camp counselor ever. Hi, everybody. My name's José, and my pronouns are he and him. And yes, I've been an enthusiastic player here on the Gauntlet for, I think, about a year and a half now. And now I'm just beginning to, thanks to the guidance of so many wonderful people on the Gauntlet, I'm beginning to try my hand at GMing. So that's exciting.
Awesome. So for our first segment, each of us is going to kind of talk about the RPGs we played in the last month or two. And then we're going to talk about one that we played, either on the Gauntlet or off the Gauntlet. So we're going to start, Sherri. Tell us about your, right now we're recording in mid-October, so your September/August?
Yeah, it's been a surprisingly busy season, particularly because I was in a huge project at work, and I was just squeezing a few games in, I thought, but it's actually more than I thought. So off Gauntlet, I'm playing Rhapsody of Blood with an awesome crew. Also playing with our face-to-face group, Dune 2D20 from Modifius and 13th Age. And then also on Plus One Experience, the Twitch stream, I played Apocalypse Keys as part of the Kickstarter promotion. That was super fun. On Gauntlet, I've played Star Wars Saturday's Starscape, which is a playtest for a game that's set to be used for Star Trek type games or Farscape type games. It was quite fun. Also playing The Veil Iterations, which is a PBTA alternate to the original The Veil that someone I know is working on. It's a hack right now at this point.
Did you just call me a hack?
No, the game is a hack right now.
Oh, okay.
You've always been a hack. But
thank you.
Yeah. And of course I got to play a few awesome sessions of Hearts of Woundland, which I was so grateful for. But what I'm going to talk today about is Dune 2D20, because it's a game that kind of has really been sticking with me. Now, the game is from Modifius. It's a part of their 2D20 system of games that they have. This was, of course, set in the Dune universe. It's a fine system. It uses drives, skills, and assets kind of to bring in the flavor of the setting, but it is what Lowell and I tend to call a tradindle game. It's mostly trad with a few indie trappings on it. It is a fine system. It gets you into the world. One of the nice things about it that it does, though, is it has you define the family, the rivals of the family, this sort of planet that your family's being sent to, that we've been gifted by the Emperor. And then your characters are supposed to play, high up titled members of the family that have like significant duties. And so that's a very exciting thing. It's different than most trad starts. And in setting it up, we had a good time doing that. It is, however, and let's be very clear about it, it is meant to be a campaign in the very classic sense as we're playing it. There's no set number of sessions. It's a big sprawling planet to discover. There's a complicated family, a swirl of enemies, potential allies all around. This is the sort of game that's just going to go until it either falls apart or we all agree we've done the thing we wanted to do. And on the Gauntlet, we don't do that as much because everything's scheduled. So this is sort of a off-Gauntlet game that has a lot of the feel of Gauntlet play, but is going to be a rambling, long-running thing, and I'm looking forward to that. So in looking at it, I have the problem is I'm a player. I have looked at the book cursorily, but my sense of the game is entirely brought to me by my GM. And so sometimes I'm not entirely sure which things are straight out of the book and which things are just brought to the table by my GM. But so far in this game, what's working for me is that decompression that comes with this sort of thing. There's a real feeling of a luxury of time in the sessions. We have the chance to discuss how things are, what we want to do. We get a few things done each session, but we aren't trying to hit a dramatic point. Or at least we're not explicitly trying to do that every time. You can tell when one's coming up, and we certainly try to handle the situation, but it is not like we are going, oh, we have this many scenes to hit that thing, ever. And that is sort of a nice thing every once in a while. I still enjoy the tension of a story game, but there's a joy to that luxury of time. There's also, in the creation of the world, we made some picks. And there is a real joy in going, oh, we want a family, and what is the industry that they do? What is it that makes them, have a presence in the thing? And we ended up going with what we're known for is we make fabrics and fashion. That's our thing. And because of that, we're very good spies, because we know how many uniforms people need. We know these, just sort of strange things like that. But then the other thing is, our other specialty is physics, because of course fabrics and that whole sense of how things are connected to each other. And this was just something we spun off just so we put, well, how about this? And they, oh yeah, that works like this. It was very fun that we ended up doing that. And we got to pick what was our family like? And we decided that they were a family that whenever there was a big change or a thing like that, that what they did is they explicitly put the younger generation in charge. That they made that thing of the older, experienced people stepped aside into lieutenant positions and stuff like that, and the younger people were put forward to do those things so that they weren't held back by tradition. So that is a super kind of neat thing that we have. So we bring this sort of strange set of things that we've made, and now we get to see how it rolls out when we actually are going through and solving the problems that are coming to us fast and furious in the place where we are. The other thing is that I'm playing with players who have played both these trad games and the story games, and for the most part, they live comfortably in that space. So again, I'm going to say I have no idea how indie this system is, how story big. I don't think it is very much. I think it's mostly a trad game with those beautiful picks at the beginning and some nods to conventions about, failure as complications and things like that. But we can talk to Lowell about that and ask him what's actually going on in the book. All I know is that for us, it's pretty comfortable. It means that we're pretty comfortable with making choices that aren't optimal to see what's going to happen. But we're still trying to solve problems. That's still what we're doing, is we're solving problems, we're investigating, we're trying to figure out what's going on. And that's the main activities of the game. So that's been great. The story game experiences that we have do mean we get more drama than I'm used to in the games. And that's been really enjoyable. And the players are enthused by that. They're not like going, oh no, this is going to complicate everything, which would have been me a few years ago. So that's, I will admit. But still, this game is about problem solving. It's about mysteries. It's about figuring out how to figure things out. And that's totally my jam, which is why I love this thing and I think about it all the time. I'm not sure about anything. I really don't know where the book stops and the GM starts. And that is a luxury as a player. And if you have that luxury, I say you should always enjoy it 100% because you don't know how the sausage is made. And that's a good thing. But I understand that problem solving isn't everyone's jam. One of the players sometimes freezes up and they kind of put a lot of pressure on themselves. I'm always worried that maybe they're not having fun, but then they say, oh, this is the game I think about all the time. So I think they are. They just kind of freeze up and go, oh, this is harder than I wanted it to be. So for some people, that can be very stressful to be doing those things, especially if they feel like there's pressure on them to be the one that figures it out or does the right thing, and they might not. And also, if there's something I'm not sure about, these are the sort of games that will really break your heart if they fizzle out due to schedules or life getting in the way in some way. Because it is that kind of thing if you go, oh, we got this big luxury of time to see this thing. It's this big fabulous jam session that we're all involved in. And if it does kind of just die out, it will be like, oh, Because we've had those.
Oh, yeah. The
And I know
pandemic
that paid
killed
so many good things.
some multi-year campaigns.
But my takeaway is that, truthfully, this is the sort of gaming experience that I came into indie games with. And it took me a while to get used to the rhythm and the energy that compressed story game experiences are about. I'm grateful for that story game experience. And I am very pleased to be bringing parts of that back to the trad experience. And I love seeing more and more of the ethos of good story indie games referenced and encouraged within a traditional system. Even if the book isn't doing it, my GM is. I love what the experience of having played those games gives to trad players. That greater sense that failure and complications are a good thing for the story, a concern about the comfort of the other players, and a real leaning in on collaboration, which was not always what I saw in trad campaigns previously. And always there, I mean, there was always some of it, but now it's here with more skill and more vocabulary for like how to discuss comfort, how to discuss safety, how to collaborate and work with someone else. We just have better words for it. It really makes a difference. And the last thing I have to say is this is my happy place in games. It always will be, is exploration and problem solving of a world and a set of characters. And I think I do it better now just because I've played so many different kinds of games. But I literally have no idea where the system stops and Lowell starts. So that's...
It is a game that definitely, of the 2D20 games, leans more towards story gamey and indie things. There's a lot of fate in it in terms of these qualities are really aspects, and there's some things about that are interesting. But one of the things is they put out the Dune book, and then they had a choice of two directions to go with what came later, and they went in a particular way, which is most of the set box and adventures and campaign things has all been, now we're going to play on Arrakis. Now we're going to play on Dune. And you're going to play an alternate version of the Dune story on Arrakis, which I think is great for some people. It's not what I want to run. I hope that eventually we would get some more material to support sandboxy play. So we'll see. Jose, do you have any questions? I don't know what your experience is with Dune or with 2D20 or any of this stuff.
No, I have very limited experience. I am really a newbie in all of this, so I'm just soaking it all in. But I did like what you said, Sherri, about the luxury of time. And I had never associated that with trad games until you said it. And I was just wrapping my mind around what that's like to have the luxury of time, that somehow in story games, the emphasis on story arc can create a certain imperative to create, whatever, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, climax, whatever. And yeah, I never thought of the luxury of time with trad games, so I'm going to keep thinking about that because I haven't gone back and played any trad games since I tasted the Kool-Aid of story games. So, but maybe maybe there's a possibility for me someday.
We're playing off Gauntlet, a mage Powered by the Apocalypse game, and it's very much, okay, we get a session in here, we get a session in there. It's very loosely structured. It's very kind of sandboxy. And I can see where some of the players are like, they're trying to figure out like how they get to the dramatic points, but I'm just like, oh, you guys just do what you want, in the sandbox way. So, Jose, I'm going to turn to you and ask you about how your games were and what you want to talk about.
Great. So full transparency, I don't play games anywhere but the Gauntlet. So I guess I really did drink the Kool-Aid. So there are no off-Gauntlet games that I have to report for August and September. But what I played on the Gauntlet, I played Breaking the Ice, which is the duet game that I played with Donna. And I played Shanty Hunters.
Ooh.
I played Brindlewood Bay. I played a series of one-page games called Frost Papers, which were kind of horror parlor games of some sort. Okay. And then I played a one-shot of Hearts of Wulin with you, Lowell. And I'm in a playtest of City of Whispers with Dan Brown, which I'm enjoying. And I'm playing Ghosts of El Paso right now as well. And I played for GCOG, our community open gaming weekend, I played Agon. And lastly, and the game I wanted to talk about was I'm in I guess it's an extended quarterly of The Between. It's 4 months long, or it was 4 months long. And that's the game that I want to talk about. recognizing that most people listening to this podcast probably are familiar already with The Between, but that's what I want to talk about anyways. So, quick intro. The Between is a game of monster hunters in Gothic Victorian London by Jason Cordova and published by the Gauntlet. So the hunters are residents of a place called Hargrave House, and their job is to investigate and neutralize monstrous threats terrorizing the city. Threats that Scotland Yard won't or can't handle themselves. And as the story progresses, they become aware of the plans of a Moriarty-style criminal mastermind that they eventually have to face in order to save Queen and country. So it's directly inspired by Gothic horror TV like Penny Dreadful, but also lots of inspiration from British horror classics and graphic novels like From Hell and League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And mechanically, it is a story game powered by the apocalypse and also uses the mystery system from Brindlewood Bay. What worked for me, I think first and foremost, I just have to say the people that I played with were all so delightful. David Morrison was an amazing keeper, and Elle, who was, I think, relatively new to the Gauntlet, was wonderful. Daryl, who's an old hand, and Brian, who I'd never played with before. So the beauty and the complexity of the characters that they created, it was such an erudite group in terms of their literary and artistic knowledge, which really played into this upper crust Victorian setting that we were in. I remember there was once when we were on this pleasure barge where there was going to be a Dionysian bacchanal that we had to somehow stop. And I remember we did a paint the scene question, and I believe it was Elle said that the boat had a masthead that reminded her of Scylla from the Odyssey. And then I was next in paint the scene. I was like, well, if there's Scylla, there has to be Charybdis. And then I said that there was this whirlpool of, oily garbage in the wake of the boat. And so the whole kind of classical Odyssey tone just started getting woven in there. And then I remember there was a threat that I believe David had created himself that was based on a William Blake poem that I had no idea about until we'd finished the threat and someone mentioned it. And then so I went looking up the Blake poem and thought, oh, I get it now. Oh, I see all the allusions. And, and then throughout the game itself, there was returning to Dante's Inferno started becoming a theme, and, different cantos from Dante's Inferno came through. So it was fun. And everyone was a great fan of one another's PCs, which was really lovely for me. And I created a character that was very much of a stretch for me. I played the Explorer playbook, which is kind of the imperialist, explorer, colonialist, kind of an unsavory guy, but a classic in that genre. Thank you to Amanda, I am not a T-Rex, Amanda, for encouraging me to play that playbook and helping me with my initial brainstorm about the character, because Lady Camilla was her name, ultimately. She was terrible. It was just a big stretch to play such a terrible character. Especially the colonial aspect of it. But from the moment she stepped off her first hansom cab into the mud outside an East End London pub, she was just chewing up the scenery. And I just really, really, really liked that. And her vice was domination, which I was surprised how frightfully good I was at doing that. It really tapped into my inner bossiness, and I got to do a horrible RP accent, which David was very charitable about. And occasionally it was a stretch for me, the colonialism. I remember once I was with Daryl's East Indian vessel character in the British Museum, and they challenged my character about the plunder of the British Museum. And then my character just delivered this very breezy and oblivious monologue about how the Empire needed to preserve the patrimony of Western civilization when lesser countries really couldn't. And after that, I just felt so dirty, but I couldn't help it. I had to do it, So the other thing I loved about the game was masks. I really loved preparing these ahead of time, which I know some people would find blasphemous. But I occasionally went a little bit overboard in preparing them, but I got better at writing really succinct masks. And these are, for anyone who's not played the game, are these flashbacks that you do about your character's history. And at first I was a little bit scared about the masks for Explorer because they actually are not about the Explorer herself, but about another character that she brutalizes. But I developed this, melancholy and regretful tone that was really a perfect antidote to Lady Camilla's kind of cheerful imperiousness. So the other thing I loved was the unseen, which was a surprise for me, because all the players really took their time creating these compelling and atmospheric scenes that were free from all the exigencies of, progressing a main plot or something like that. Mm-hmm. And there's a mechanic called Echoes in the Night, which was so much fun, particularly for this group that was so thematically driven and thematically rich. And it was just so easy to do it because of all the great material the other players were giving me. And so this kind of thematic riffing just became a much more integrated part of our play, even when it wasn't a mechanical incentive, even when we weren't doing Echoes in the Night. And the other thing I really love about the Unseen and the Echoes in the Night mechanic is that it really rewards listening carefully to other players. And it changed the way I listened to what other people were doing and deepened the way I was listening. The other thing I loved was just the setting, which I think we all were very motivated to get really interwoven into this complex, tapestry of Victorian London that we all had so much, to bring. And I remember nerding out on thinking, so if Lady Camilla has to walk from the Russian embassy back to Hargrave House, I guess she would have to go through Hyde Park and then figuring out what would happen there. And so those nerdy moments were great. What I'm less sure about, I think the investigative aspect of the game, I don't think is exactly my cup of tea. And so sometimes farming clues felt like a bit of a drudgery for me. So I wanted more unstructured role play time, but that's just me. And David was very generous about giving me lots of room to role play the main move of the Explorer, the Royal Explorers Club, and let me really create distinctive characters for all those. Because basically, the Explorer just gives a lot of orders and tells people what to do all the time. And that's what I did. My takeaway, it was a really deeply collaborative play experience that scratched so many of my roleplay itches. I loved how the mechanics like the unseen, the masks, and the vulnerable moves really supported in-depth roleplay. And while at first the tight structure of the day and night phases seemed a little restrictive to me, we all found our rhythm with it, and the result was really delightful. I'd play it again in a heartbeat, and I am in fact playing Ghosts of El Paso right now, which is a version of the Between, so perfect. That's what I had to say about that game.
Amazing.
I certainly get what you mean about the clue farming. When we did our Hearts of Wulin hack that uses the mystery stuff in it, like the first mystery, I did it in 2 sessions. And after that, I was like, I'm just going to run. And we'll see when we get to the point where people think that we've kind of gotten enough clues. And, we did 4 or 5 sessions for a mystery after that, and lots of room to let it breathe and to interact with the NPCs and so on. So yeah, I get what you mean about that.
It's like sometimes I got into the mindset like, every scene has to have one of these mechanics, a clue or something like that in it. And people disabused me of that. And so I got more loose around that. I think it was more of a mindset issue than anything else.
I mean, that's the thing is that there is sort of a thing of you need to be moving these things forward, but there's a thing of, am I obligated to in this moment that I really want to do this thing in? And yeah, it's going, should I be selfish or should I do the thing? And it's really for the group. It's settling it out with the group, isn't it? To get what your pace really is with those things. But the payoff is so cool, right? When you get it and then you work through the pieces and it's so, but yes, there is that thing of it's a little, and you have to do it. So.
It sounds like a great group too. We love Daryl. We play with Daryl a lot. He's
amazing
great
player,
and so many other good people there. So I'm going to finish up this segment with maybe a little bit of a more downer in my combo. That may be a spoiler warning here. Off Gauntlet did Dune, did 13th Age. We also did a Mage PBTA, though because of schedules and stuff, we only got 1 session in of those latter 2. On the Gauntlet, I had a couple of game facilitator camps, and so I got to play one-shots of Brindlewood Bay, Trophy, Aegon, Monster Heart, and finally Alice is Missing, which was really striking. Like, that's quite a game. I'm still processing that one. And then we had GCOG as well, and so I ran Pasión de las Pasiones, which I adore, and I ran a one-shot of a game called Crescendo of Violence, which is a neon noir game that I'm running a series of right now. And then I got to play an OSR game, Mystic Bastionland, with Horst running that. And that was a hex crawl, and that's kind of stuck in my head. It was really interesting. There was a really interesting set of emergent story elements just in that little hex crawl. On the Gauntlet sort of regular series, ran the Veil Iterations. I ran Fallout 2D20 that I'll probably talk about at some point in the future. I ran a couple of series of Hearts of Wulin for some people. And then I also ran Fading Suns Pax Alexius, which is what I want to talk about today. Fading Suns is a long, old game. It's one of the first games to kind of come out from some people that left White Wolf, and they built this archaic space, sort of space medieval game years ago. And I kind of loved it. And I've played it a couple of times with a friend who ran it. But I also bought like everything because I wanted to read it. And I thought it was really cool. Loved the setting elements, sort of. This is the latest version of that after several various editions and an abortive one a few years ago. This has come out from the German company Ulysses Spiel. They did a Kickstarter for it. And this is a slipcase box set with 3 books. And they've got a bunch of additional materials. Like, I wanted to just get a copy of the character book because that has the core rules in it. And I had somebody at Gen Con and they didn't even have it there. You couldn't even get the individual book, even though the Kickstarter fulfilled last year. It's very weird. Part of the reason I ran it is because it was a bundle of holding that had all the PDFs of this. And we had some conversations about it on the Gauntlet. If you're not familiar with it, Fading Suns, as I said, is kind of a medieval space fantasy. It's a little bit like Coriolis, but where Coriolis uses Middle Eastern Islamic trappings, this uses high medieval, high Catholic trappings. And it describes itself as a space passion play. The church is very present in this, and there's a lot of factions that are going on in it. But, I love spaceships, but then they've also got dueling swords and things like that. So it's a little bit like Dune, but a little more medieval. Everything looks more medieval in this. Fallen technology, precursor races, people are afraid of tech, but they need to use it. There's a lot of good stuff here. And the art is very pretty. So I ran this, and I ended up running 3 sessions of it. It is a deeply trad game. I will talk about how I handle characters in a minute, but I don't know what it is about the setting. It appeals to me. It looks pretty. I love the idea of it, but I don't know if I can actually explain what compels me about it, like what I actually want out of it. It's a little bit like the same problem I have with Coriolis. Like, I love the look of it. I love the idea of it, but I'm not sure what we do in it. So there's that, but it still hooks me. I still read through everything. I still went through everything. This version of Fading Suns is cleaned up. It's a single die roll. You roll a d20 rather than roll a d20 and then roll a bunch of d6s and some other things. It's got a very much clearer central resolution mechanic, which is great because that's been one of the problems with Fading Suns in the past. They've got a nice kind of life path, walkthrough set of choices feel in the character creation section. Still deeply complicated, but at least it kind of spreads that out. It has the basic mechanics kind of spelled out in the first part of the book. It's a game with a ton of ability and talent lists, like 70 pages of those. It's too much. It's over egging the pudding. It's way too much, but I'm a sucker for looking through those and seeing all the cool stuff that you can take for your character. Like that appeals to me, especially when everything costs the same amount rather than like, okay, this costs 5 points and this costs 10 points, things like GURPS or whatever. So the flavor is really strong. There's a really interesting idea in the game about what they call technosis. This idea that in the game setting, if you use too much technology, then it corrupts you and it actually inflames kind of your vices if you use too much technology. This is an interesting idea. It's literal and concrete in the game. This is not an idea that is like a philosophical one, like it's mechanical and it's a concrete thing that occurs to characters in the game. And very tied into conceptions of sin that are in this very Catholic game. There's some neat stuff there. So I've said all that. Let me tell you what my problem with this game is, and I have a multitude of them. And I don't usually like to be this negative, but why would a company that did a successful Kickstarter, that is a major company that publishes things all over the place, not put freaking indexes in their books? In their books that people are going to be using at the freaking table. And even when you try to use like a search on the PDF, it's still incredibly hard to find things because they're spread over, because it's a game that has a lot of terminology and a lot of weird terminology. So when you think, I want to find out how to calculate my hit points, well, you have to now know that hit points are called vitality, and you also have to know what they call the resistance ratings and things like that. There's all this kind of specialized terminology that's scattered throughout. And the book, rather than going, here's what you need to know when you do character creation, here are the steps, here's what you need to have and stuff, it puts a bunch of stuff in one section alphabetically. Well, if the terms don't make any sense, and it's not clear what we're referring to and what we need to look up, then putting it alphabetically doesn't help anybody. It is some of the worst order of presentation of information in a core book that I've ever seen. Also, if you have tiny font, if you have small, light font, please don't put textured, colored page backgrounds in your book. It makes it very hard to read. And it's especially true if the PDF doesn't have a layer turn off function, but even the physical book becomes more challenging. It's an accessibility issue that companies ought to be thinking about. This is all physical stuff. This is all structural things. The game itself has an interesting approach to the mechanics. So when you go to make a roll, it's a skill plus stat roll. So let's say your skill is 8 and your stat is 7. Add it together, you need a 15 or less on D20. You roll that D20. If you get that number or less, then you succeed. The number that you rolled under that is your victory point total. So it can be anywhere from 1 to 15. You then have those victory points, and they are concrete points you now have, like tokens you would have at a table. And you then can spend those points to overcome the resistance of your opponent, like their armor. And then once you've spent those, then you can spend the rest of the points to do extra things, like extra damage, or you can spend them to get increased effect on a success roll. But you can also keep a certain amount of the points around from round to round, up to your, I can't remember what it's called, but essentially you have a storage limit. And at the end of each turn, you have to give up the points that you don't have enough room for. It's a lot of points. It's high numbers. And in the first couple of sessions, it felt very wonky. At the table, maybe if we had the physical tokens and we could kind of be moving them around and stuff, it might have felt okay. But here it was very difficult to track, and people weren't sure what to do with the points. And it wasn't until the third session when we had a fight that kind of went on, and there were a lot of rolls, that it actually felt tight, like the victory points kind of created some tension. But it was 3 sessions before we felt that. And it's a lot of shit to track. This game has so many things to track. You've got these surges that you can refill your victory point pool. There's certain victory points that if you get a critical, you get them. There's special victory points called weird points, and they store around and they can do extra things that, you have skills, but then in order to use some skills, you have to have these capabilities that allow you to use these skills. There are all kinds of conditions that do different things and have different effects. Horst actually listened to the audio of my session, and he said to me afterwards, at a certain point, I thought you were just making shit up, Lowell. I thought you were just making stuff up. It's got a lot to it. It's got a lot of details to it. And I think it feels over elaborate. You've got talents, like special talents that you can get that create additional banks of victory points that are just used for special things. So conceivably, if you were sitting at a table, you could have all these little piles of tokens that you would have to track and move around and spend and stuff. Online, this is madness. Even at a table, I think this would be madness to me. So mechanically, I think there's some problems with the game. The setting and material itself I have to point out too. It was pointed out to me by Steph that this was a very Catholic game. And I kind of had that in my mind, but it wasn't until I had that in my mind and I went back to read it. It was like, oh yeah, sin is super concrete. There's a lot of very judgment things. We've got the church, like the reality of these saints and things are very much present in the thing. And it's a very Western conception of church and nobility and state. It's really Western, wildly so. And it's also a game that has slavers as a character archetype. It's got inquisitors as an archetype, and there's no discussion of safety in the book. I'm like, this book came out in 2021. There's no reason why there shouldn't have been some kind of conversation about that in there. And that's just wild to me. There are some other things, some other bits in the setting that, like, it kind of wants to question the role of nobility and imperialism, but it also is still kind of celebrating and supporting the system that's going on there. It's weird. I wanted to love this. I really did. I was very much hoping that this would be a 21st century strong revision of the game material and of the system, but it just wasn't. The system's messy. The book's organization doesn't help, and in fact works against things. I like the vibe of it. Like, I like archaic space stuff, and I want to do something with that, but this is not the game for that. So that's my negative assessment. Sherri, I know you have feels about this.
I just remember a past dip into Fading Suns campaign and literally players going, for a roll had to be made. And so I was sort of hoping that this would be like an improvement on that. It sounds like it was not at all. I just, yeah. I mean, people literally going, oh, I gotta roll. Not that they were afraid of the thing, but of having to make the roll up, and that was it. It was just,
yeah.
Oof.
Just listening to you describe the mechanics, I felt like that was way beyond my cognitive load right there,
Yes.
let alone actually trying to play them.
Oh yeah, here's the last thing I'll say, and then I'm going to move on here. So they have a quick start book of characters. They have a book of characters. This seems like a great thing. Okay, because character creation is complicated. I went to give pre-gens to people for these characters. When I was working through that, I realized that the characters are all different levels of the pre-gens. Why would you do that? Why would you not provide a set of first, second, or third level characters so that everybody can like, oh, now we're going to go pick through? Why? It makes no sense. And it makes no sense because it's not really clear until you actually start digging into the characters. That's in fact what's going on. That for me is indicative of the problem throughout this game. If you like Fading Suns, Pax Alexius, I apologize to you now. And I do not want to, if that's your yum, I am very glad it was not for me. So, listeners, we're going to go on to our second segment.
Hi listeners, I wanted to let you know that new issues of Codex are now available in the Gauntlet Patreon feed. Codex is the Gauntlet's bi-monthly role-playing game magazine. Each issue is organized around a theme and stuffed with brand new material for your table, including original games and supplemental material for games like Trophy and Brindlewood Bay. Check out Codex by going to patreon.com/gauntlet. Your pledge not only gets you Codex and other Gauntlet publications, but it also supports all the important work we do in the Gauntlet, including this very podcast. If you'd like to try before you buy, there's always a free issue of Codex available on our website, gauntlet-rpg.com. And if you're looking for back issues, you can find them on DriveThruRPG, including in reduced price bundles. Thanks.
For our second segment, we ask our guest to talk about a topic of their choice. José, what did you want to talk about today?
I wanted to talk about something that's been on my mind. Actually, it's been on my mind since I started with the Gauntlet a year and a half ago, and kind of transitioned from I played D&D as a child, and then I played a little bit when the pandemic hit for about a year with a group from work. but I was feeling like I was just getting droplets of fun out of it and shovel loads of drudgery. But when I discovered the Gauntlet and story gaming, I felt like, oh no, the fun's coming hand over fist now. And as I've been exploring different games across these months, I've been really trying to track, where is my yum? Where's my pleasure? Especially the pleasure around storytelling, which is so central to the games, obviously. So I realized that I'll just use this shorthand for talking about my own process around this storytelling, which is I feel like there's like a listening stage for me where I'm listening to other players and I'm listening to the game and I'm listening to the setting. And then there's like a second stage that's just kind of the mulling or the digesting or the metabolizing. And then there's a third stage, which is the telling, the presenting or the performance of it. Maybe you could call it that. I'm not sure exactly what the best words are for it. So I definitely had pleasure in the listening stage, and that a lot of that happens exclusively in game. And I noticed when a game would make too many demands upon me that interfered with my ability to listen to what the other players were doing. Like if I knew I had to do something really complicated in a second and another person was doing a scene, I couldn't figure that out while listening to them, and that felt like a loss for me. So I really enjoyed it when there was more space to be absorbed in another person's storytelling and let myself even take notes sometimes. And I realized it was a lot of the joy of, the improv technique of yes and. A lot of the joy for me in that was that people were listening to me and I was listening to other people. You can't yes and if you're not listening, and so there was that. And then the second phase, the mulling one, what was really surprising is when I started contemplating this and reflecting upon it, I realized that really the majority of my pleasure comes here. I thought it was going to be in the telling, right? But a lot of my pleasure was coming during that process of metabolizing or digesting what I've heard. So for instance, I would do it in between games. A lot of it. It wasn't, so, we just use the term cognitive load, right? This was more my imaginative load. I realized I could take a certain number of games, like maybe 3 at the same time, and really let my unconscious, because it was more of an unconscious process, like when I would be emerging from sleep or something, scenes would come to me, things about my character, questions about other people's characters, images about my characters floating around. And it was really pleasurable to be in that soup. It felt like a soup of creativity. And it would just slowly gel into something. And maybe, like, when I was talking about doing the Masks of the Past in the between, I would actually write out a scene from that, because in the between you have the prompts ahead of time, so you can do that. And that was a lot of fun. It was just fun to be able to have a really polished scene to present later on. But more than the presentation, again, it was the process. And then in the game, when we're mulling collaboratively in the game, this kind of writer's workshop approach, we're using these like meta conversations to support and scaffold. That was really cool too, as long as it didn't get too much. It didn't take over the game. I've been in games where that kind of meta conversation takes over, 80 or 90% of the game time. And then that just felt like, wait, when do we get to play? That should be supporting the immersion, because I think immersion is really, it's a big goal for me. And I didn't want the meta conversations to take center stage, but I did enjoy them, in small quantities. I could think it's like the analogy of theater, like, too much time seeing backstage and it undermines the magic of what's happening, on the stage. And I realize that sometimes the mulling process or the digesting process would get truncated in the heat of a game or even erased completely. Some moments in games, it's like you hear something and then you have to respond to it immediately. Like it reminded me of my improv class last year where, it's like, no, there's no mulling time. You just have to work with your first impulse and you just go for it. It's like, okay, I can do that, but it gets tiring, emotionally tiring on me to be doing that kind of thing over and over again. And then, of course, the telling, the third stage, is pleasurable, but it's more like the cherry on top of a sundae for me in terms of the storytelling than the actual really, really juicy part of it. And I recognize that sometimes spontaneous improv happens all at once in a game, and that's really exciting when it happens and it all clicks together. But at times I need more mulling time, or I need more listening time, or I need space for these different processes to happen or else I start feeling tense, and that interferes with my pleasure in the game. And so the questions I have on my mind are that, I'd love to present to you all is like, how do we scaffold and support each of these kinds of processes, listening and mulling and telling in ourselves, but also in our fellow players, being fans of our fellow players, and then also through GMing, and also maybe through game design as well. But that's what I probably know the least about. And, how do you two experience the pleasure of storytelling in your games? Where does it really sing for you?
I really love the collaboration. And I will say that the big thing that I've learned and that I've taken away are from those players who, when it's their turn, they actually take that moment to think for 10, 20, 30, even 60 seconds before they start talking. Because for me, I've always been a silence filler. I'm like, oh, just got to keep going, Mm-hmm. So that was always like when another player would do that, it would sort of stop me in my tracks. And I started to see that it gave them the chance to actually do that mulling, that fitting the pieces together, so that when they went forward, they could be more confident that what they started, that what they put out there was something that the rest of us could work with. And I think that that is one of the things that I've been trying to bring into my thing, is to give myself that time. Because certainly my thing, and to some extent talking about that luxury of time, mm-hmm. There is that thing where I don't have to worry about being as on the spot in a trad game than you do with a story game, where you want to be in a conversation that's, and the back and forth and those things. So yes, I completely get what you're talking about. I know when you don't have that time and you're like, okay, I don't want to just be filling time. I don't want to be just being a space filler. Yeah, I have tried to take that pause for those moments in that time. But also, I know what you mean about the mulling afterwards. And you see, I live with my GM, so I actually have this person where when I'm thinking about it, I can like come up to him very casually in the house and go, I was thinking about this thing in the game. And he's a captive audience, and it's the best.
I do that to my partner, but he doesn't know what I'm talking about.
What you said about the rules kind of getting in the way, the cognitive, I really very much with you on that. Because I've been trying to do a bunch of new systems just to try them out, get them out there, and it does make it harder for me to actually focus and listen to what the players are saying. Mm-hmm. When I'm also in the back of my mind trying to remember, okay, how does this mechanic work? Should I be pointing people towards things? Mm-hmm. How do we do this? That it eats up a lot of the brain space for me. Mm-hmm. And for me as a GM, one of the reasons I like being a GM, besides kind of having the power of being a meeting manager, is that I like being able to ask people questions about stuff that I don't know, about like what's going to happen next, where are we going to go with this? Like that's a process I really enjoy. And then mulling over what they've just said and how can I reincorporate that. I want to make sure that I remember those names or those details so I can bring them back and generate surprise for them later to show that I was listening to what they said. Mm-hmm. I'm very much with you on that.
Yeah, I've been noticing. So now I've been playing all this time, and now I'm in the GM role for a Monster Hearts game this month. And I'm noticing that my process is very different around this. There's not actually as much of that mulling going on because I'm not thinking about my particular character, and there's so much unknown about what's going to happen at any point. So I think I prep less as a GM than I do as a player, which that's paradoxical, right? But that seems to be what I'm experiencing right now, at least with Monster Hearts. So yeah, it's a little bit surprising for me, but there's still a lot of pleasure in it. And the other thing I was going to say is I really appreciate when a GM does little things that give you a signal of what you might be required to do a little ways down the line, like in 5 minutes or something like that. For instance, I was talking about the unseen in the between. One of the things that I appreciated that David would do is when we first presented the unseen, there are a list of 4 prompts usually, and he would assign them to us so we knew when our turn was coming. even though it was going to come in the extent of, probably an hour of play or so. And so there was some sense of, okay, I have some space to work with if I'm not the first prompt, that is, in which case I just have to bite the bullet and jump in. So those kinds of warnings, it reminds me when I was a preschool teacher, and it would be just like, 5 minutes until break, snack time. And if you didn't do that 5 minutes before snack time, and you just called them in for snack time, it was deadly, and it was, it was just a mob scene. But if you gave them that 5-minute warning, somehow that softened the transition, because transitions are hard.
Mm-hmm.
They are. That's actually one of my catchphrases.
I was thinking too about, like you talked about, sometimes getting the pressure. I think a good GM is cognizant of the pacing and moving it up and down, like giving space to breathe and giving the tight scene, but then immediately after that, giving plenty of time to breathe and slow down. I think that's really important. Yeah. And here's another thing, that idea about players having chance to pause and think and stuff. It's not just that the GM needs to be ready for that and aware for that. The other players need to do that too. Because there's some players that are thinking all the time, and they're very excitable. And when they see another player stop, they want to jump in. They want to give them an idea. They want to help them out. And I appreciate that impulse, but you need to let that person think. Maybe they have a question. Maybe they want to start with their answer. Give them time to do that before you come in at them. I think that's really important. And the best players will wait until somebody has asked for help or asked a question to come in with their suggestions. So I think that's really important too.
Yeah, or offering it in the chat when we're online. So it's kind of in the background rather than it's not taking over their turn when they're in one of those silences that Sherri is describing, that some of us, it's harder for us to tolerate them than others. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the chat, but I often forget to use it. Part of it is I type very slowly. So,
do you ever find with your sort of off-game mulling that when you get back to the game and something happens in game and all the things you've thought about kind of fall away because something is, and you kind of go, oh, dang.
Oh, well, that's going to ruin all of that.
Now I'm just going to seem like a goof if I do that. Yeah.
But there's also the reverse of that. When someone says something, it's like, oh, that's perfect for what I was thinking of doing. Now I have it in, and I can incorporate what they did,
Yeah.
I think a lot of the mulling is actually not so much saying, oh, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. Often for me, it's questions about relationships between characters. How does my character feel about this or that, or something that I think is going to happen? Probably some form of it is going to happen, no doubt, in the story. How would my character react? And then also sometimes, especially if I'm doing one of those, like those masks where I write them ahead of time, it's not that they're not very plot driven. They're more atmosphere and character driven for me. And so they don't, it's harder to cut them off at the pass because they're not plot driven.
Awesome. Anything else you want to say about that?
No, other than I feel a lot of gratitude for all the pleasure that I actually am feeling in all of these games. And also I want to remind myself that at times when it's not flowing, that I can reach out to people and talk to fellow players and GMs about, how do I maximize my yum in this game, rather than just kind of saying, oh, well, this game's not going to be yummy and just kind of resigning myself to it. So giving myself a little bit of agency now that I understand a little bit more what makes me tick, to be able to communicate that to other people, I think is part of the game. And I don't always know where in the game to do that. So I mostly do that in between sessions and in back channels, because there's not usually a space, other than stars and wishes maybe, to do that. So I'm learning to find the nooks and crannies for those conversations.
No, that's a really good observation. Listeners, during our last segment, we are going to discuss something that is lately inspiring us or giving us joy. So, Sherri, what is giving you life?
Oh, my answer is so ridiculous, but Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak, the expansion to Monster Hunter Rise, which I loved, has come out, and it has been my tonic for those times during the pressure from the project that I was on, where if I could get, an hour away, I could sit down and play a little hunt or two and just have that relaxation. Except that I'm done now, and I can play as much as I want, and I am still enjoying it because it is a game that I am inherently bad at, and I have to play it a lot in order to get to mediocre in it. But I am getting better, and this is a joy to me. There is something about a skill that inherently is not in my wheelhouse. I am not a person with good hand-eye coordination or anything like that. No deep sense of like being able to recognize a visual pattern and respond to it, perfectly and be in the right place. No, I'm a completely button masher kind of person, but I'm actually getting slightly more skilled than pure button mashing. And I am thrilled to be at that stage in my video gaming life.
Awesome. Jose, what is giving you life?
Well, last week was National Coming Out Day, and I'm a college professor, and we set up a nail painting booth. And I can show you all my nails right here. To those who can see them, they're purple and sparkly. But I spent hours on 2 afternoons painting students' nails who wanted to, express their support for their LGBTQ, friends by painting their nails. And it was lovely. It was a lovely way to connect with students. I don't normally hold their hands and paint their nails. And that was a great way to be in contact with them. The other thing is that I've been binge watching Schitt's Creek, which is making me laugh quite a bit. And I love that they're little 20-minute episodes. And I love how much humor these actors can express just through their facial expressions, even without their dialogue. Makes me really feel super appreciative for people in games when they have their video on so that I can improv with them when I can see their faces. And then the last thing that's bringing me life is I pulled out from an old dusty box in my garage my old Sandman comics from the 90s, and I'm rewriting the whole series. And that is just bringing me a lot of joy and taking me back a long ways to some fun times.
Awesome. We bought our niece the big Sandman omnibuses, and she still has those in a prized place on her bookshelf when we go over to her house. So for me, of course, it's October when we're recording this. It's still horror month. I have a Shudder subscription, and actually what I like most on Shudder are the documentaries that they have. They've had some older ones, like that one on Boris Karloff and his life, which was really interesting. There was a longer one on folk horror that was really good. But the two that have come out this month for Halloween there's a 100 greatest horror moments. And this is one of those talking heads. And then you get a bunch of people talk and they show a clip and stuff. It's dumb. It's like I love the 90s, but with murders. And I enjoy it. But even better is this series, Queer for Fear, which is about gay and lesbian text and subtext and actors and directors. And it is great. There are 3 episodes out right now. It is dynamite. Was created by, I think, Brian Fuller from Hannibal, and he's on it. And lots of really interesting people talking about things. And they talked about Mary Shelley. They had a really interesting look at the guy who did The Invisible Man and Frankenstein, whose name I can't remember, but who was gay. And looking at the subtext, the movie Gods and Monsters is based on his life. And it's really, really good. Like, it's solid. Smart conversation, not just superficial, like really digging into things. And it's absolutely worth a watch. Really, really good. That is our show. Thank you so much for playing with us. You can check out the show notes for links about the games that we discussed. And you can find out more about the community at www.gauntlet-rpg.com, where you can find articles, podcast info, and links to everything. You can follow us on Twitter at GauntletRPG. If you're interested in playing with us, do check out the forums, check out our Twitter feed. We do have a Patreon that supports the podcast network and everything that we do. You can find that at patreon.com/gauntlet. Remember, the hard part is spelling gauntlet right. Sherri, thank you once again for co-hosting.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure.
And Jose, thank you so much for being willing to come on and talk with us today.
Lovely to be here. Thanks for the gracious invitation. Always great to talk to you all.
Awesome. And listeners, that is our show.